everybody, and welcome to episode 2 of Other People's Processing, otherwise known as OPP, the show, I suppose, podcast, where people send in raws and I take a stab at them and see what I can do, and then kind of share the whole thing with you guys. Before moving on, just a couple quick notes. First off, if you're not watching this video on my site, well, shame on you, for starters, but also if you go to the site and the address is focalmatter.com/blog, focal matter like fecal matter but with an O. There I have the original raw file available for download, so if you wanted to take a copy, play with it, upload it to the comments and share it with everybody else, have at it. I also have a form there if you want to submit your own raw for me to maybe try and take a stab at. And secondly, I just wanted to show real quick, if you will note at the bottom of the screen, I now have a little hotkey shower display thingy. So hopefully that'll make it a little bit easier to follow along since I'm pretty keyboard happy. Alright, so let's jump right in. This week's submission is from Emily, and it is a photo of her boyfriend. A couple things I want to do here. So I want to clean up the background. One of the pitfalls of shooting in a small studio is you don't always have the space to move your subject away from the wall. So things like shadows and marks on the wall can sometimes show up. So I want to clean that up a bit. Maybe hide some of these. Maybe reduce some of the shine. Clean up some of the stubble. Some basic touch-up. Alright, so first off, let us start with camera calibration, as I did last week. Now, you'll notice that there are a lot more profiles this week than there were last week, and that's because the profiles are based on the camera that took the photo. So last week we had a Canon, and that had essentially a neutral, portrait, standard, vivid, landscape, etc. And this week we have Nikon, which has a few more and different versions of them. So I've taken a look at the different profiles already, saved you the trouble, and I like this one. It gives a little bit more contrast, kind of darkens the tones a bit, so that's where I'm going to start. From there, I'm going to go over to tone curve, and I'm going to play with the tone curve and see what kind of mischief I can cook up. Maybe get that a little bit less. Fill those in a bit. And then, yeah, that's fine. Oops. Okay, and let's take a look. So nothing major, just kind of brightened it up a little, added a little bit of contrast. And next up, we will go right into basic. So the first thing I want to do is I want to clean up this yellowish pall that the image has. So, the color temperature is a little bit off, and I want to fix that. So to set the white balance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this little eyedropper, the white balance selector. Now, normally you'd want to select a 18% gray card. That is the perfect neutral gray, and that helps kind of calibrate your colors. If you don't have one available, what I've found is I'll pick something as close to white as possible, and it kind of gives me a better starting point. So it's still not perfect, but whereas the tint was off and the temperature was off and it was completely throwing me off. Oops, wrong way. There we go. This at least sets a better baseline for me to start with. So then I might come in here and I might warm it up just a tick. And let's see. There we go. Okay. So we've got that set. Exposure and contrast I'm going to leave alone for now. I tend to take care of both of those in the tone curve panel. You noticed how it brightened it up and it kind of added a little bit of contrast. So from here I'm going to skip these and go straight into the Fab 4. I have no idea why I called it that. Nobody calls it that, and God willing, nobody will call it that. But anyway, I will skip these two and I will go right into these. And we will never speak of the Fab 4 comment ever again. Okay, so let's see, get the highlights. Now I want to add some shadow. There isn't a lot of natural shadow to the portrait, as you may notice. There's a little bit under the chin, but for the most part the light's kind of blown out. So I want to augment the shadow however I can without going a little too overboard, because as you'll notice, the hair's gotten a little bit darker now, and since there's no hair light, it was already dark to begin with, so we don't want to go too crazy with the blacks and the shadows, but this looks about good. Finally, one thing I'll do is I will take the clarity. Now, normally you really don't want to play with clarity too much in a portrait. As I covered previously, it can have a really extreme effect in either direction. However, used in moderation, it's not too bad. You bump it up maybe 10 or 15 to give guys a little bit more edge, maybe a little bit more solid lines, especially in the jaw. And you might knock it down 10 or 15 for women to just kind of help smooth the complexions and, kind of even things out a little bit. Alright, so let's take a look of the before and the after. It's already starting to kind of come together. Excellent. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly go through the remaining panels before getting to the adjustment brush. That tends to be one of my final few touches. Okay, so we've already done with the tone curve. Oh, by the way, let's maybe bump the contrast up a little bit. There we go. After getting everything else out of the way. See, now one thing, however, you'll notice is that by adding the contrast, I'm kind of filling in those shadows again. So now I might want to ease up on the shadows to help compensate. So it's a little bit of a balancing act sometimes. Finally, one thing I want to do is I'll maybe knock the vibrance down just a bit to help take too much color, because you don't want the skin to be too glowing. Our skin isn't naturally all glowy and so we just kind of give it, take a little bit of the shine off. Alright, so we're not going to touch hue, saturation, or luminance. The colors are fine. Likewise, I'm not really going to split tone it because, I don't want to stylize this too much. It's supposed to be a simple, straightforward headshot or portrait. Detail, I do want to sharpen, however, I'm going to sharpen it selectively, so I'm going to save that for later. And lens corrections. Okay, so now as we can see, there was a little bit of barrel distortion. I actually kind of prefer it this way. I think it's a little bit more flattering, so we're just going to pretend we didn't see that. Okay, so one final check. Starting to come together. Now we get into adjustment brushes. So what the adjustment brush lets you do is it allows you to make changes to the image selectively. So I like to use this a lot to help clean up skin a little bit, do little minor retouching like brighten the eyes and such. And I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. So since I'm already in the adjustment brush, I have to hold space if I want to zoom in or out and move. So let's find this. Now I'm going to take one of my presets for enhancing the iris. So this is something I have, and you can see, like any preset, all a preset is, it's just a collection of the settings. So these are settings that I put together that I like how they affect the irises specifically, to help kind of brighten them up, bring back some of the color that gets lost when you photograph them. And to do that, I kind of played with the settings and I got this. Alright, so let's take a look at that. So you can already see the eye kind of brightening up. So one other thing I might do is I might clean up the skin a little bit. I'm going to be doing more of that in Photoshop, but let's at least get it started. And so I'm going to click New, and then I'm going to choose my softened skin. Now normally I use this on female portraits, so I'm going to bring it down. And all it is, it's just a brush that blurs the clarity, that just drops the clarity a little bit, and it causes sort of a smooth blur going on. And you'll see it in a second in the before and after. It's the kind of thing where it's pretty subtle, so even as you're applying it, sometimes you might want to throw on the overlay just to make sure you got it. But when you click it on and off, then you can see the difference. And again, it's simple. I just want to take a little bit of the edge off of the skin, make it not quite as harsh as it was, but only in certain areas. You'll notice that I left the eyes, I left the mouth, I left the ears, the eyebrows, things that you want to keep detail. You want to, let's clean that up a little bit. Anything you want to retain detail, obviously, you won't paint over. So bring it out. Oops. Hit the right button. There we go. And that's about it. So one last check before we take it into Photoshop. Nice. Alright, and into Photoshop we go. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop, and let's zoom. Why are we not zooming? There we go. Alright, let's zoom in on this handsome young fellow. Okay, so a few things we want to do here. We still need to clean up the background. I still need to clean up the shirt, and I still need to clean... Basically, I need to clean up a whole bunch of stuff. So let's start by duplicating the background layer. Always, always, always. Sometimes I like to give them little names just to help me identify. So, for example, this might be the backdrop layer. And so what I'm going to do with the backdrop layer is I'm going to screen it. Now, as you'll notice, as soon as I did that, the background got brighter. So did the foreground, but the background got brighter as well. So now what we want to do is we want to add a mask to this layer so that the brighter background shows, but the brighter subject does not. So I'm going to hold down Alt, and that'll create a layer that's already filled in. And then I'm going to take my handy brush, and I can just paint away what I want to show, like so. However, that's kind of a laborious way of doing it. A better way to do it is to actually just select it. So I took my wand, and I'm going to select the background as best I can. Get you over there, you. I think that's everybody. And then I'm going to take the refine edge, and I'm just going to shift it out a little bit. So basically, I'm pushing the edge of the selection a little further along. And the reason I do that is so that when I feather the selection, it's going to come back in and I don't really lose anything. Alright, so let's follow that. And then make sure that we take a quick look. If you'll notice, there's that white outline. You want to make sure that the outline is over the mask, because that outline shows you the layer that you're working on. So now that I know we are, I hit Alt-Delete, and voila, the background is killed. Now there's a little bit over here, so let me just kind of touch him up right there. So now what's happening is everything on this layer that's covered in black isn't going to show. So the brighter subject gets hidden. Oh, in case you're wondering what this is, hold Shift and you click on the mask and you can see with or without the mask. Okay, so we might now go back into this, take the dodge tool and clean up the background a little bit more. Just really kind of get in there, clean it up. If it feels like it looks a little too clear, we can always go to the layer and just drop the opacity of the layer anywhere from 100% all the way down to 1%, and you can see the backdrop behind it. So this is a handy way of kind of just graduating the change you make. So I kind of like 80%. This is with it off, this is with it on. So I just want to clean up the background. Speaking of cleaning up, let us do something about all these wrinkles. So I'm going to copy the background again, and let's call this one shirt. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of my favorite retouching tool, the patch. And what the patch tool does is it basically works like a clone stamp, except it's a lot more targeted, and it's a lot easier to demonstrate. So let's say I want to get rid of this wrinkle right here. So I'm just going to outline the wrinkle. Doesn't have to be perfect. I don't know why I'm singing. Okay, so I've got it outlined, and then I'm just going to say, let's take from here and patch this with it, hence the name, and voila. Now, you may look and you may notice that, it's still not quite perfect, but that's because we're not quite done. By hitting Control-Shift-F, I can bring up the Fade Adjustment tool. And what this does, it allows you to fade the opacity of the previous adjustment you made, just like it were on its own layer, except without actually having to put it on its own layer. And so I like to use this to just kind of like fade my patch. That way it still de-emphasizes what I'm hiding, but in not so obvious a manner. Without. So, the object is just to kind of clean it up simply, de-emphasize without completely hiding. I am going to travel into the future where I have retouched all of the wrinkles so that you don't have to sit through the whole boring process. And 3, 2, and we're back. And so, as you can see, now that we are living in a future with fewer wrinkles, it looks a lot less obvious and a lot less distracting. So now where the patch tool really comes into play, however, is cleaning up the face. So let's jump right into that. And what I like about it is that you can select what you want to patch and you just pick where you want to patch it with. So almost like the reverse of a clone. Whereas with the clone stamp, you choose the source and then you paint it over the target. With the patch tool, you choose the target and then clean it up with the source. But in addition to that, it is also great for dealing with eyebrows and also eye bags. Long day. Okay, so what I do is I select the eye bag. I find somewhere relatively clean. I try not to recoil in horror, and then I fade it to about 20 or 30. Nothing too crazy, because I don't want to get rid of it entirely. Again, the object is just to de-emphasize, just to kind of like, smooth things along. I would also use it for something like this where you have a little bit of glare. Let me reselect that. There we go. And then fade that to 20, maybe 30. And then now I still have that highlight, but I don't have the glare. Okay, so maybe we should just call this patched. Alright. Starting to come together. Let's see. That's what we started with. That's where we are now. Finally, let us do something about that beard. Generally, in headshots and portraits, you want your men to be clean shaven unless they actually wear facial hair. So you generally want to avoid the 5 o'clock shadow. Obviously, it's not that important when you're doing a quick portrait at home, but just something to bear in mind. Alright, so let's go up to 40 with that and let's see how that looks. Much better. Okay. Oh, and just a quick heads up, if you're using patch in CS6, you actually want to be in normal mode. Content Aware is a new mode that they've added and it's awesome, but it also takes a little bit longer to work and it can sometimes be problematic. For what we're doing now, normal's better, quicker, and simpler. I don't need to go back and change anything, but just moving forward, something to be aware of. So I'm going to go in and clean up the rest of the beard. I'm going to do this in sections just because my source area isn't that big. And to save you the utterly boring task of sitting and watching me clean up this man's beard, I will instead fast forward to the future. Okay, so here we are in the future where people are shaved digitally, and let's see how good a job I did. Not too bad. Just kind of cleaned it up a little bit. The shadow's still there, but as I've been harping on and on about, you don't want to get rid of it, you just want to de-emphasize it. Alright, so let's do just a quick check of the background and... Oh! Okay, so let's clean that up. Let's put you over there. You guys are good. Okay. Now, one thing you may have noticed, and if you had a quick eye, you would have seen me do it just before jumping into the future, is that I avoided retouching any of the moles. You don't want to touch anything permanent. Okay, you just want to touch up the stuff like this that, on a good day they would have gotten rid of it. So the goal of retouching ultimately is you want it to look like the best version of themselves, but you want it to be accurate versions of themselves as well. So you don't want to change anything permanent like scars or birthmarks or the like. Alright. That's what we came into Photoshop with. That's what we're leaving Photoshop with. So let's hit save. Now for the final touches, which will be sharpening and vignetting, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of this and I will put it into a group. I will duplicate the group and I will merge that group. And then that way I still have my source material, but now I have one nice simple merged group to play with. Alright, next up is sharpening. First thing I'm going to do, duplicate the layer and zoom in to 100%. You want to be at 100% because that gives you the best idea of how sharp things are getting. Alright, so let me pull up my unsharp mask, and you can already see from the default settings that there's a fair amount of sharpening going on. I kind of like that. That's why I have it at that setting, so I'm going to let it go. Now here's the thing to notice. So this is sharpened, this is not sharpened. The skin, we don't want that sharp. We didn't spend all this time cleaning up this beard just to make it look beardier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another full mask to the image. So now it doesn't show through. Then I take my trusty brush and I just paint over the parts that I want to sharpen, namely the eyes, the eyebrows, the hair perhaps. Things that I want to retain detail, I'll paint the sharpening into. You also generally want to keep lips sharp. And I like to keep the edges around appendages, noses, ears, things like that. You want to kind of keep those sharp just because you want them to really separate from their background. Anything with a texture you generally want to keep sharp. Okay, so let me zoom out a little bit. So let's see. So it's very subtle, but it's present. And again, it's the kind of thing you notice a lot more the more zoomed in you are. Alright, so that's good. Oh yeah, let's just paint out that hair. Alright, so now that we've got the hair done, let me do a quick save. I'm just kind of going to give it the once over again. I'm not decided what I want to do about this hand. I could crop it out. You know, it is a little bit distracting, so you know what? I think I will, actually. I'm just going to do my crop the simple way and just select all, nudge it up, Alt-I-P. There we go. That's at least a little bit less distracting. Alright, so let's save that and let us go back into Lightroom. So this is what we started with, and this is what we came out with in Photoshop. So let's take a look. Old and busted, new hotness. So, you know, and the thing that's funny is when you put them side by side, the changes look pretty dramatic, but hopefully the change also looks natural enough that it doesn't look obviously processed. The skin still looks textured and human. You know, he doesn't have this weird otherworldly glow. I did forget to add the vignette, but honestly, for a studio shot, it's really not that important, and it tends to look pretty obvious. And there we have it. Now, we can actually take it a little step further if we wanted. So let's create a quick virtual copy. Go back into Develop, and we can make it black and white. Now, when I first go into black and white, you'll notice it looks kind of flat and boring. Here's the cool thing. You take that little adjuster, you click over an area, and then you just drag it up and down to change how filtered that color is. So basically what you're doing is, see if you look at on the right, the higher up it is, the brighter it is, and the lower it is, the darker it is, because I'm affecting how much they're filtering those colors. Okay, so I'm going to bring it up to about there. Everything else actually looks pretty fine, and then I might play with the contrast a little. So you generally want to keep that contrast up. I might even go into the tone curve and see if I can give it a little bit. There we go, nothing too crazy. Okay, let me, still not happy with that skin tone. There we go, okay. Let us add my lighten hair, which is just exposure and clarity. And let's lighten his hair. Now that actually looks like we're frosting his tips, so we are going to dial that way the hell down and bring that to about 0.1 and bring you the way down. How's that? How's that look? Still a little high. He's not cruising, he's just getting his picture taken. Alright, so let's see. Yeah, it's a little bit better. Just give it a little highlight into the hair. And voila! And now you'll notice that that last bit was pretty quick. So that's one of the nice things. Once you get the color right, switching to black and white isn't that difficult. And a nice thing here is the shirt actually gets a little bit darker because of the added contrast. So that kind of helps hide the wrinkles. Thanks everyone. That's it for episode 2 of OPP. I will see you next week, and don't forget, if you want to take a crack at the raw image, the links are on the blog at focalmatter.com/blog. Alright, thanks everybody for tuning in. I will see you guys next week.